Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, Jonas Vingegaard passes his first Tour de France tests with flying colours. We have a race in our hands, everybody. I'll be looking back at the opening weekend of the Tour de France, which more than lived up to my own very high expectations. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that putting on 20 kilos has not stopped Jonas Abrahamsson enjoying a bit of climbing. After 2 days of the Tour de France, he's leading the KOM competition by a handsome margin. We also learnt that if Jonas Vingegaard has a problem with his race bike, he can just lease a bike. That was one of a few hiccups that Visma's had already at this year's race. Yesterday, Wout van Aert and Matteo Jorgensen both hit the deck, whilst the same happened to Wilco Kelderman on stage 1. So with 3 crashes in just 2 stages for that team, you started to wonder when their luck was going to change. Well, they certainly had a lot to be cheerful about in the end yesterday, despite those incidents. Stage 2 of the Tour de France was the first real showdown between the GC favourites, and Jonas Vingegaard more than passed the test. The day featured 2 ascents of the short but very steep Colle di San Luca. Visma Lease a Bike controlled the first time up it and for the first part of the second ascent before UAE took over with Adam Yates. Now everyone's been speculating that Pogačar and his team would want to put Vingegaard to the test in this opening week. Nobody knows how well he's going to be going since that crash that he had at the Tour of the Basque Country. So you may as well give it a nudge in case you can expose weakness right from the off. Well, give it a nudge Pogačar did, but he was matched, seemingly with relative ease, by his arch-rival. Even before Pogačar went, Yates had put many of their rivals into all sorts of trouble. So if we pause it here, you'll see we've got all 3 Ineos GC riders off the back. Geraint Thomas had already been dropped before this, but he's here as a support rider at this Tour de France. Bernal, Rodriguez and Pidcock, though, they're all protected riders and all clearly struggling there. Now, I'm less surprised about Bernal and Rodriguez. They're both diesel-type riders that struggle a bit more with the short, explosive climbs. But Pidcock, well, he's normally the other way around. Better on the explosive efforts than the long mountains, at least compared to his peers. Now, just off the top of the screen here, there's Primož Roglič, who'd also been distanced alongside Ayuso and Simon Yates. And that's a real concern. This sort of climb is normally Roglic's bread and butter. He's won there 4 times before, 3 times at the Giro dell'Emilia and once at the Giro. So let's hope that was just a very off day and not a sign of things to come for him. So who's left in the front group at that point in the race? Well, let's pause it again, shall we? Yates still drilling it on the front, a bandaged up Jorgensen glued to his wheel. Then it's Vingegaard and Pogačar, followed by 2 Belgians, Evenepoel and Van Gils. And then at the back, Enric Mas and Richard Carapaz, who performed well above my expectations on the day. Alexander Vlasov had also been on the coattails of that group, and it was hard to tell if he'd been dropped or simply called back to help Roglic. Regardless, it was a few moments after this that we finally got the much anticipated attack. 2 things here. Firstly, to be able to accelerate like that when some of the biggest names of the sport were already over their limit, that is crazy. Secondly, for Vingegaard to be able to follow that attack, given everything he's had to recover from, was really quite remarkable. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we do indeed have a race in our hands again this year. Now, when I was watching the race live, I felt like Vingegaard looked well within his own limits. There wasn't a moment's hesitation from the reigning champion as he responded to Pogačar's attack. However, I've watched it a couple of times more since then, and actually he is rocking and rolling and out of the saddle quite a lot, a bit more than I first realised. Either way, that was a hell of a performance from the Dane. Over the top, Vingegaard initially refused to work, as he has done often actually in the past, but he did eventually cooperate, presumably in the knowledge that the breaker would be sweeping up all of the bonus seconds. The next 2 riders over the top of that climb were Evenepoel and Carapaz, even though he didn't see it. And then it was already 40 seconds back to the Roglic group, if the graphics were to be believed. Simon Yates was leading the chase with Ayuso on his wheel, then Landa, Martin and Ciccone, and then the trio of Bora riders, Roglic, Vlasov and Hindley. Bardet is also there in the yellow jersey, as too are Bernal and Rodriguez of Ineos, but Pidcock was really struggling at the back to stay with them as they got to the top of the San Luca climb. Now, we didn't see a huge amount of what was happening behind for the next few Ks, as the TV director decided to concentrate on the collaboration between the 2 race favourites. One thing of note was that Vingegaard refused to take a pull on the next unclassified climb. Now, whether or not that was because he didn't want to or simply couldn't, of course we don't know. But my hunch is that he was close to his limit and didn't want to risk going over it. Now, this is where cycling kind of sells itself short again and makes it hard for fans to figure out exactly what's going on. Because from the top of the climb, we had no information, no footage of Evenepoel and Carapaz, who went over it a handful of seconds behind Pog and Vingegaard. The first indication we got of where they were was an on-screen graphic coming up suggesting Evenepoel was only 14 seconds behind the pairing on screen. A couple of minutes later, the camera moto pans round and we see Evenepoel flying across the gap with Carapaz glued to his wheel, and they make the bridge. Well, Evenepoel does. In his post-race interview, he said Carapaz didn't come to the front once. The last little bit to the finish line is really quite interesting. Initially, it looks as though Pogačar is going to sprint, but then gets frustrated. And then once Carapaz flies past, he doesn't even get out of the saddle. It almost looks like there was a gap at the line to Pogačar, and I wonder whether that was deliberate. It was almost as though he didn't want to go into the yellow jersey, so he didn't have to go through all the obligatory post-race protocols that go with it. Whatever his intention, he did go into the yellow jersey. Evenepoel, Vingegaard and Carapaz are all on the same time, separated only by their cumulative finishing positions from the first two stages, and it's Evenepoel that now leads the young riders classification. Tadej, the winner of an opening stage that I'll get onto shortly, is 5th overall. And then it's Van Gils, Bernal, Bilbao, Pidcock and Ciccone. They're part of a cluster of 18 riders who are all on 21 seconds. Now, whilst the GC battle was playing out, there was a group of riders some way up the road competing for the stage win. So first up, a shout out to the stage winner. Arkea B&B Hotels have been coming to the Tour de France since 2014, but they have never won a stage. Well, young Kevin Vauquelin changed their fortunes yesterday. He rode the perfect race. Clearly he had the legs, but he and the team rode extremely well tactically as well. With Rodriguez for company up the road, they had the numerical advantage. Vauquelin went up the road himself between the two ascents of San Luca, following a move by Movistar's Nelson Oliveira and Uno X's Jonas Abrahamsen. So, congratulations to Vauquelin, who made it 2 French winners in 2 days in Italy, but congratulations as well to Abrahamsen. Just 2 days before the start of the race, I had the privilege of sitting down with him to chat about his morphing from lightweight climber to 80kg classics rider. However, it was this part of the interview that really made me chuckle.
Before I also not was like interesting to get a girlfriend, but when I was starting eating I get a lot of testosterone and I get my girlfriend, and it was very fascinating what the body reacts when you get food. Yeah. So it's very, very special.
You can watch that full video, which I have to say is a fascinating story, over on our main GCN YouTube channel. Anyway, it was a well-timed video because he's been smashing it over the first 2 days of the race. Yesterday he finished runner-up to Vauquelin, but he extended his lead in the KOM competition and became the new leader of the green jersey classification to boot. So well done to Jonas Abrahamsen. Just quickly before I chat about stage 1, in case you missed it last week on the GCN show, we now have our GCN Plus documentaries available to watch again, and they're right here on YouTube. There are currently around 50 for you to choose from. To watch them, you will need to sign up to be a member of the channel. It's a monthly subscription. Again, your support right now is massively appreciated since we've regained independence from Warner Brothers Discovery. So thank you to everyone that's already signed up. It really has been genuinely heartwarming to see. Back to stage 1 then, and what a way to kick the Tour de France off. Frank Vandenbroek of Team DSM Firmenich PostNL was part of the early breakaway that day. Had a nice advantage midway through the stage. With about 50 k's to go on one of the hardest climbs of the day, his teammate Romain Bardet attacked the GC group and managed to bridge across. That pair then rode together from there to the finish, and despite the efforts of Lidl Trek, EF, Visma and others, they weren't caught. I have to say, Vandenbroek looked the strongest of the two, even though he'd been out there for so long that day. But I'd say the team was right to gift Bardet the win. That was his 196th Tour de France stage, but his first ever yellow jersey. Incidentally, it's the first time that a team has gone 1-2 on the opening stage of the race since trade teams were introduced in 1969, and it's also the first time since then that the French have won the opening 2 stages. Both stats come courtesy of Killian Kelly, of course. Now, I don't think there were many people who weren't very pleased for Bardet, one of the nice guys, and it feels fitting that he should end his career having led the Tour de France at a point during it. But what about Van den Broek though? I mean, that young man has a very bright future. So he uploaded his data to Strava post-stage, and for the last 1 hour 20 minutes of what was a 5-hour stage, he averaged 316 watts. Average, not normalised. So his normalised power was over 300 watts for 5 hours 45, which presumably included the neutralised zone at the start, in which he'd been going quite easy. He was rewarded with the best young riders jersey for his efforts, as well as having the kudos of being more than instrumental in the team's stage win. Without him, they definitely would not have pulled that off. At the other end of the race was another of their teammates, Fabio Jakobsen. He'd been struggling for a lot of the day, but perhaps not quite as much as Mark Cavendish. Astana had almost their full team around him for the opening climbs and the rest of the stage, and it was quite painful to watch, let alone to ride. Clearly suffering in the heat, he was being sick off the bike, and for some time, there looked to be a real risk that the dream of a 35th stage win would be over on the very first day. He's a fighter though, and got through, but to say he was relieved to cross the finish line, I would imagine, is an understatement. He should have his first opportunity today to go for a stage win. Stage 3 is the longest of this year's race, but flat enough that it looks like it should be a bunch sprint. You can watch that stage and the rest of the Tour de France live and on demand on Discovery+, where you'll get a full season of bike racing. Just before I wrap up, a couple of other bits from the Tour. A quick plug for our own shop. This is one of 25 different designs of t-shirts in our French collection for this year, where you'll also find hoodies, a mug, and a special edition GCN Camelback water bottle. Right, other news from the Tour, which couldn't have got off for a worse start for Jan Hirt. The Soudal Quickstep rider got his bars hooked around the straps of a fan's bag en route to signing on for stage 1, splitting his lip and chipping off a large chunk of 3 teeth. Thankfully, he was able to start and finish the first 2 stages, and his teeth looked to have been fixed. The only withdrawal we've had so far was Michele Gazzoli of Astana, who was unable to finish the opening stage. On to some other races then, and I'll start with the Tour of Slovakia, which marked the final pro road race for the legend that is Peter Sagan. He didn't get any standout results over the 5 days, but it was nice to see him bow out in his home race. Mauro Schmidt was the overall winner of the race, one of 3 riders in the top 4 for Jaco Alula, with Alaphilippe having to settle for second. The Frenchman won stage 3, but Soudal Quickstep were on the back foot from day 1, which was a team time trial won by Jaco. At the LOTTO Thüringen Rundfahrt, there was a brilliant win for Ruth Edwards, formerly Ruth Winder. That was her first win since returning for retirement at the start of this year, so well done to her. Martina Fadanza of Sirotti took 2 stage wins along the way, whilst the others went to Misha Bredevolt, Sandra Alonso and Margot van Pachtenbeker. And finally, Laura Molinar won the Women's Tour de Pologne in what was a 1-2 on GC for the Volker Wessels Women's Pro Cycling team. That is all for this week. Enjoy the tour, everybody, and make sure you don't miss tomorrow's stage, which scales the mighty Col de Galibier. I'll see you again next week.